All right, I think we can start here. Hello. I'm Mike Murphy, co-director here at the Center. I'm a washed-up old Republican campaign consultant who hasn't actually voted Republican for president in 12 years. Because I met Donald Trump in 1993. Hey, careful, I'm still a right-wing nut, okay? Ask me a policy question, it'll clear the room. All right, I want to introduce our incredible panel here. We're going to start with our elected official. We have New Mexico's 32nd Attorney General, Raúl Torrez, here. Big hand for General Torrez. He is a former federal prosecutor and senior advisor in the U.S. Department of Justice, and he was an elected DA in Albuquerque. Excuse me, I'm fighting off a cough, so forgive me for that. Next, Shaniqua McClendon of, I'll bet your listeners, she's Vice President of Political Strategy at Crooked Media. Former political director for Crooked, home of the popular podcast Who Listens, Pod Save America. All right, it's my second favorite after Hacks on Tap with me and Axelrod, because I get paid for that one. Former White House intern for President Barack Obama and has worked in the Senate for Kay Hagan and a legislative director in the Congress for Alma S. Adams. So, Shaniqua, welcome. Absolutely. Neera Tanden, my old friend. We used to argue on TV somewhat, but we find ourselves more aligned these days. She was a senior advisor for President Joe Biden, director of the Domestic Policy Council there, which was super important. She's president and CEO the Center for American Progress, where she's advanced progressive policy on healthcare, economic growth, and national security, and is an all-around great patriot, also worked in the Obama and Clinton administrations. And finally, Tad Devine. Old professional rival, good personal friend, Democratic media consultant, one of the absolute best in the business with a long history of success fighting for the Democratic Party and Democratic causes. Tad has advised presidential campaigns for Bernie Sanders, Al Gore, John Kerry. Internationally, he has worked on more than 30 elections across Europe, Latin America, and Africa. He's a founding partner of Devine Mulvey Lombard. Sounds like a DWI law firm in Providence. But he's one of the best in the business. And master of one of the most obscure skills in politics, which you guys over there know all about, delegate counter at national conventions, which there's no more important job in a contested convention. Right. So we have a great panel here. It is entitled, big applause for Ted. The Democrats, coming back or cracking up? So this is going to be fun for me, because as Eddie Goez knows and Mark Campbell over there, who I've worked with for years in the old GOP, whenever we're on the ropes in the Republican Party and we think all hope is lost, a great shining angel appears that always saves us, the Democratic Party. Hey, let's defund the police. And we're like, oh, thank God. So I'm going to have a little fun with this. First question, and I'm going to start with Neera. Mamdani in New York, a lot of press, big switch to the left, shook up the establishment. What does it mean for the larger Democratic narrative going forward into the presidential primaries? Good thing, bad thing, mixed thing? What's your take? And then anybody else who wants to chime in on the new mayor.
Yeah, I think we should look at Tuesday's elections in totality. And Mamdani did really well in New York City. I think he identified cost of living as a crucial issue. It differentiated him in the primary, and he ran a kind of relentless campaign on cost of living throughout the general election. But we should also recognize that on the same day, Abigail Spanberger won in Virginia and Mikey Sherrill won in New Jersey. And I think we should also take some note of the fact that Mikey Sherrill ran statewide in New Jersey and had a greater margin of victory than Mamdani in New York, which is a 70% Democratic state. Now, he ran against two other candidates. It's a complicated picture, but I think the totality of the lesson we should take from Tuesday's elections across the board, which were, really historic victories. I don't think anyone, I was looking at early vote count in New Jersey and it looked pretty good, but even I did not predict a 14-point Sherrill victory in that state. And after a lot of naysaying about her as a candidate and a lot of circles. So I think the thing that they all focused on was a kind of relentless focus on cost of living. Maggie Sherrill was incredibly focused on utility rates. Utility rates have increased the most of any particular item in the kind of costs that people experience. It's been a 10% increase year over year across the country, 14% in New Jersey. She identified a real pain point, got to it early, talked about it relentlessly, and I think that is an important lesson for us as we go into, or for Democrats as they go into 2026, which is, there's a lot of different problems in the current administration, but what is, assaults on democracy, other things, but what allows, the broadest tent to come together is a real concern that the administration is focused on things like building a gold ballroom instead of your costs of groceries, utilities, et cetera.
Class, pure class in the ballroom. Tad, let me ask you a follow-up.
Yep.
Because I think one reason I agree in the general election sweepstakes, those gubernatorials were impressive. I think Trump can take some credit for it with his numbers falling. But the Democratic mayor's race is like a huge Democratic primary. It may be a little more, I don't think Sherrill, and I might be wrong here, or Spanberger had big, hard-fought primaries in those races.
Sherrill had a competed against
Somewhat, but
two hardcore progressive candidates, and came out the victor in the primary.
But I don't know if it was the kind of thing Newark was, which was all primary. I'm not sure the two progressives were well funded. What about the presidential primaries? The definition of the party going forward. Does it tell us anything? Is it going to be a center-left brawl, AOC running for president, all that, which Republicans, of course, would like, or not? That's a special thing. You've been in a lot of Democratic primaries.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, I was very excited by Mamdani's election, and the thing that excited me the most is it's the first time that somebody's got 1 million votes in a New York mayoral race since Bob Shrum was writing speeches for John Lindsay. Okay, if you want to talk about working both sides of the aisle. Okay, that was a long time ago, 1969. So, and I think, and I saw this, working for Bernie too, and we all saw it when Obama ran. When you have a candidate who has the potential to mobilize groups of voters, in this case, young people, to participate in the system way beyond their usual numbers, you have the potential to win any election. That's the way Barack Obama won Indiana, by having as many 18 to 29-year-olds vote as people 65 plus. That's the way Barack Obama won North Carolina in 2008, by having 18 to 29-year-olds turn out in numbers as many as 65 plus. And I don't find, and in terms of what's it going to look like on our side, earlier this morning, I wrote a list. I can't read it; it's too long, of Democrats who might run for president. Because there's so many people on it, and I put.
It's actually longer than what you wrote down there.
It's much longer than this, but I did include Stephen A. Smith.
I want that after.
Okay. Let me say it. Because I don't think we know yet, but I think I know pretty much in my mind what we need. The Democratic Party needs to have a nominating process that is different than the process that we have used, particularly in the last few election cycles. And here is the most important thing we could do with the process. And I've spent a lot of time on rules and all that other stuff. We have to have a nominating process that allows the voters to pick the nominee. Okay, that's really the secret to success. And if we can design that kind of process, and I do hope if we do that, that New Hampshire returns to the place where it has been in the past, because I think it is a great place for people to be tested and to find out who can really connect with voters.
Not to get super controversial, but how did the voters not pick the nominee in 2020?
In 2020, how did the nominees
not pick the voter? I mean, that was an open primary process. We had 20 candidates.
Sure.
How did that not happen?
The voters haven't been picking nominees since we changed our rules in the 80s. And I just want to admit up front, I was one of the people in the room changing the rules, on behalf of people like Mike Dukakis and Walter Mondale and other people I work for.
I'm going to stop you just because we have a whole question.
Yeah, sorry.
We're going to come around because I want to wheel around over here.
Later on.
So Shaniqua, was this election a teaching moment for the Democrats that maybe it's time to pivot from beyond piling on Trump, which is kind of baked in? People who vote Democratic kind of get all that, and into other issues with, of course, affordability now. the drinking game, word in any cocktail party in Washington. But it strikes to me that the recipe of telling the voters they already have they're right about Trump was spent. Is this going to lead to a new direction, or will the emotional need to rant about the crimes and misdemeanors cause them to go back to the pleasure route of, let me tell you another thing about Donald Trump? What do you think?
Definitely need to shift in a new direction. I think we'll start to see that. Two other races I just want to point out from a couple weeks ago in Mississippi, breaking the supermajority, even though Republicans still control everything down there. And then in Georgia, at Vote Save America, the program I run, we invested a lot in that race. And I think, again, it comes back to, one, affordability, which maybe we'll get drunk hearing people talk about it so much. But I think it's the thing that most Americans resonate with. We had Crooked Con a few weeks ago, and one of the panelists on my panel mentioned that when her father got a $1,200 check during Trump's first administration during COVID, he cashed it and he called her and said, "This is the most money I've ever held in my hand, ever." And so, we can't just ignore the things that people feel when we're thinking about affordability in their everyday lives. And Donald Trump understood that. And that's why he was able to win again, making a lot of those connections for people. And I think if you look at New York, if you look at New Jersey, if you look at Virginia, we are starting to see candidates focus more on this. It feels pretty simple, like it's not rocket science. People are struggling right now. Rents are really high. I am 38. I still don't know when I'll be able to afford a house, and I have a pretty good job. I'm one of the people who has a ton of student loan debt. I'm appreciative of my degree. But I think this is something that resonates with everyone. Now, does that mean we're not going to hear about Trump anymore? He is a lame duck, but Trumpism is still something that is here and will continue to impact our country, and I don't think we have to invoke his name to talk about it. But Donald Trump has seemed to lost control of his MAGA base. Some of the things that he has tried to tell them not to do, like vote for this Epstein bill that now he's supportive of, they've defied him. He got a lot of pushback after his interview with Laura Ingraham saying that we should invite immigrants into this country to take certain jobs. Those are not the things that his base wants to hear. And I think we're seeing them kind of shift further to the right. And that is something we have to be concerned about. So while I don't think we should beat the drum on Trump itself, we can't ignore the threats. And I'll say, looking at Mississippi, I think people are paying attention and they don't like what they're seeing out of Republicans.
Raúl, I'm going to go to the expertise question with you for a minute. What the DOJ is turning into the new Cook County Democratic machine times 10 with its compass. It's becoming highly politicized in a way we've never seen before. Will that become a political weapon for the Trump administration, chasing large Democratic donors? Because they seem to be in the selective prosecution business. They're going after philanthropy now, colleges. What impact do you think this politicization could have on the next two election cycles?
Well, I have sort of a unique personal perspective. My dad was the longest serving federal prosecutor in the state. So which basically means I inherited the saddest family business you could ever walk into. But I used to do my homework inside the U.S. Attorney's office when I was a kid. And when I was there, I got to know lots of different people. My dad was actually, was a Democrat, was appointed under the Reagan administration. And at no time did anyone ever inside that building identify either their colleagues as a Republican or a Democrat, and they never identified anyone involved in an investigation as a Republican or a Democrat, because once they assumed that role, they were expected to do one of the highest forms of public service without fear or favor, because they recognized that they were holding the power of people's lives in their hands. And so of all of the destruction that we've seen inside our institutions, the harm that's been done inside of the Department of Justice is going to take a very long time to undo. I think it's obvious that the Trump administration has already used the selective prosecution of the president's political opponents as one of the most powerful weapons in their arsenal, but I actually think it's going to backfire on them in the long run. I think most of these cases are destined to fall apart. You're already seeing federal magistrates in Virginia questioning the Comey investigation. But more than that, I think the American people are profoundly uncomfortable with the weaponization of the department and the misuse of the department. And I think there's going to be a real backlash. Now, how you can reestablish the norms that guided the practice is a whole different and more challenging thing that we're going to have to really work towards over the next years and potentially decades, depending on how the Supreme Court rules on the unitary executive, because that's what sort of sits behind all of these big moves, the attacks on federal agencies, the defunding of federal agencies. It's this notion that the president alone has unfettered control over independent agencies and direct federal agencies. And if that's true, then it's going to be very difficult frankly, for both political parties to reestablish the norms of conduct when there's always the prospect of the next presidential election resulting in a clean sweep inside an agency and then shifting to a place where Americans can no longer trust that the cases that we undertake are predicated on the evidence and the facts and not political opportunism.
Mike, can I just follow up on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, I think this is a kind of crucial point about the norms and how do we restore the norms. And, I guess I would say, there's a lot of discussion of whether, you just referenced to use Trump or not in the future and in elections. But I think we should recognize, or at least I would say, in my view, what is happening in the country right now with the weaponization of the Department of Justice. I just coming in and Donald Trump is talking about how great MBS is in Saudi Arabia and what a wonderful guy is. And I'm sure that has no connection to Jared Kushner and his family deals in Saudi Arabia. And I just think we should be really clear that there is a level of corruption happening, at least I'd say in my view, that we don't really even have a language about. Our whole system relied on norms. And that turns out that norms are really just a way for Trump to hack the system. And so as we go, as you're talking, I do think in the next couple of years, and we're definitely doing this work at the Center for American Progress, we are trying to think through what are the laws that rein in this kind of corruption? Because I don't think we can go back to a world where we just rely on norms and political leaders to accept norms, et cetera. Because the truth is, what are norms enforced by? They are enforced by a media that induces shame in political figures. And when those political figures don't have any shame and their own political party is so in fear or whatever that they don't say anything, that whole system is broken. So I think to actually promote democracy going forward, we have to think through how we're going to protect these norms. And fundamentally, I think people see all of these issues. I don't think people see cost of living over here and they just ignore democracy. I think people live in a complicated world. And I think we have to be forceful on where we see political corruption and not say, oh, that's a democracy issue and people really care about cost of living. We have to talk about all of these things because we also have to set up a world in 2028 where we have a clear contrast of how a future Democratic president would do these things differently. And they have to have a robust agenda of how they're going to rein in these things. So I don't think norms is going to do it into the future because this could just come back 8 years from now or 10, 12 years from now. And we need much bigger thinking of how we're reforming, transforming these institutions. So we don't come back to this world.
Quick follow-up. You exist in the world of large Democratic donors. Is there a chilling effect? Are people worried? I go write a big super PAC check in the midterms and I'm going to have the DOJ knocking on my door?
I think the space where this is actually the worst is in foundations. We are definitely seeing a lot of foundations very scared of the tactics of this administration. And I think that, I think a real problem here is that fear is an asymmetric asset of authoritarians. And the great use of fear is that people curb their behavior without actually the government having to do anything. And so, I think it is pathetic, honestly, when very rich institutions like foundations or law firms or media institutions like cower in front of this because they are definitely saying democracy is less important to them than, not getting attacked or whatever. But it is, I hope this is changing post the elections. I think a lot of people were like, I don't know where the country is really, but it definitely has had a chilling effect. We've seen it much more with institutions than individuals.
Excellent. Tad, as you well know, I think a lot of people know, Donald Trump is a big believer of the wag the dog theory of politics, change the subject, which is why don't be in a fishing boat near Venezuela. We've now sent an aircraft carrier down there, which is, I think he's got some plans to change what's on TV every day from the economy. But on a lesser scale, will the Democrats ever learn not to take the culture war bait from the Republicans? Because it's Trump's favorite move, which is, I'm going to arm airline pilots. And then wham, we're not talking about the cost of eggs. Have the Democrats learned their lesson, or is we're going to see it all over again in this election cycle?
I don't think you're going to see it all over again in the next election. And I say that because we didn't see it in the one that just happened a couple of weeks ago, okay? I mean, they tried to make it happen in Virginia, okay, where they ran there was no shortage of trans ads in Virginia, was there? But they had a problem. The audience wasn't looking for that. They weren't listening to it. And when the other side shows up and talks about economic issues, we connect with voters. And I think that's what we saw in all of those contests, whether it was in, the biggest issue in Virginia was the economy, okay? The biggest issues in New Jersey were economic. 35% said the economy, 37% said taxes, okay? And actually the Republican won more of that group than the Democrat did. But these economic issues in New York, the biggest issue was cost of living, okay? It was 56% of the voters said it was the biggest issue, and Mamdani won 61% of them. I mean, that's, winning that issue itself. And I think in terms of, culture wars, I don't think we as Democrats should change where we are when it comes to protecting the rights of human beings to live freely in this society. Okay, I think I made an ad for it really wasn't a TV ad. It was a long form video for Bernie Sanders. The first thing we did in 2016, and I interviewed him in his backyard, and he was talking about I was trying to talk to him about civil rights and the work that he had done as a young man trying to advance that cause. And he said something about we have to protect the rights of people, whether they're gay or they're straight, or whether they're transgender, they are human beings. And I don't think anybody ever put transgender into an ad until we did that. And when I showed it to them, I thought maybe they might have some reluctance, and nobody did. And you know what? And on the campaign trail, people didn't really make that into the Bernie Sanders issue, because what Bernie Sanders was talking about was his message, that America has a rigged economy held in place by a corrupt system of campaign finance, okay? And the issues that emanated from that position. And I think if we stay there in that economic sphere, and we talk about healthcare, and we talk about jobs and wages for people, and we talk about, how they're going to succeed and be able to educate their kids and find a home to live in that they can buy, okay? Then we will connect with them. And these other issues, the Republicans can talk about it day and night, and they'll go nowhere.
All right, this is now the fun part. I have a double lightning round question. Try to answer in one sentence, okay? I'm going to start over here with Shaniqua, then go to General Torrez, and then to you guys. 1 year from now, in the midterm elections, in the hottest 35 races for House and Senate, will Mayor Mamdani, it's my last Mamdani question, be enough of a success, he'll be invited to campaign in those places, or not a success and he won't? We'll start with you.
It's going to depend on the district. I think the elections we had a couple weeks ago shows us that it depends where you are to be the kind of candidate who can win there. So I think where he resonates, he will go, but I actually think that will be in a lot of places and not just blue places.
Okay. General?
In the districts that make a difference, he won't be invited to participate in the campaign.
Yeah.
Me?
Yep.
I mean, I let me say it both ways. I think he will be a success, and he won't be invited to participate because nobody cares. The New York City mayor has never campaigned in a swing district in the history of America.
No. Giuliani was everywhere when he was
yes, after 9/11, when we were a noun, verb, and Giuliani and 9/11. Yes, that was definitely.
And Lindsay before.
You're talking about the general election, not the primary, right? Okay, because in the primary, he will be invited.
Yeah.
People who want to raise money.
Very good point.
Okay, and he will go to some places. And I think in the general election, I agree that it depends on the district. And there's some places where he could be helpful, and other places where he shouldn't go.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, of course.
Congressman Pat Ryan in New York, when Pelosi kind of worked against her to get the ranking member position for the Oversight Committee, Pat Ryan talked about the fact that he invited AOC to his district during the general election because she was authentic and resonated with people there. So I think it's really about that and not, oh, he's too progressive or not. It's really, can he get people excited?
I think it's also about success or failure. If he's hitting home runs, he'll be a lot of places.
Yeah.
If not, I think you'll have a lot of time to work on those problems right there in Gracie Mansion. All right, number 2. We are in, there used to be a thing called the invisible primary when you were thinking of running for president. You go have meetings, line up donors, labor on one side, business on the other. Now the invisible primary is highly visible. In fact, it's early. So in the 2025 pre-presidential, not so invisible primary, is California Governor Gavin Newsom now the front runner for the nomination, to the extent there could ever be a front runner this early. But has he put himself in first place in the early innings? Shaniqua?
I think more people throughout the country know him than anyone else. Most people know who their governor is, who their local, or, more relative elected representative is. I think because of this redistricting fight that he made national, a lot of people know who he is. Front runner feels like a strong word.
General, is there Newsom talk in New Mexico?
No.
Okay, good. An honest man. Go ahead, Neera.
I mean, I think, first of all, I don't think there's like any front runner in 2025, and there'll be a ton of people running. So it's like, I think this is like a slightly premature, but I would say, the Center for American Progress has been a big pusher of blue states responding to Republican mid-decade redistricting. Like, there are a lot of people who didn't want the governor who thought it was crazy to put up a ballot initiative. And politics is a game of high risk, high reward. He put a ballot initiative on. I talked to people around him who were concerned about it. He chose to do it himself. He campaigned hard. He raised a lot of money to get that ballot initiative passed. It passed by 2/3. It won a majority of independent voters, not just Democrats. And he made a compelling case as to why it was important. And people came to the polls. So, I don't think it's like front runner, whatever, but I do think that at a time where people are screaming for leadership in the Democratic Party, one of the reasons why there is a strong groundswell, at least in many places, for Gavin Newsom's leadership is because he did take a risk and he did win. And that is something that we should acknowledge as a positive thing instead of being cautious and not kind of trying to fight Republicans where you can.
Tad.
Sitting here today in California, I'm going to say yes, he is. Here's why. One, Jonathan Martin wrote a piece in Politico saying he was a front runner. Okay, so he's the new Curtis Wilkie. I told him last time he was here. I said, "You're the new Curtis Wilkie. Everybody's going to do it." 2, Newsom, it wasn't just a referendum. He's been engaging Trump in a way that Democrats are desperate to see. And I think that's important. And 3, and finally from me, if I were working for him, the last thing in the world I'd want to be 3 years out is the front runner.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
You do not want that label.
Exactly.
Call me, I'd rather be a Democratic socialist than the front runner.
So
okay?
I'm doing him a favor by saying not the front runner.
Right.
I think he won 2025 hands down. He took a big bet and it won, but I would be paranoid if I were him about that position. And I believe the big thing will be pivoting beyond being the general of the anti-Trump army, which will work next year, to be the what's next guy. And that's a tricky pivot. DeBoo, if you're here, hire Tad. Okay. So I'm going to go to General Torrez here for my favorite question. Every presidential primary, this is going to be an interesting one because both parties, I know Trump may have dire plans, but both parties will be open seat races, which is a real x-ray with a lot of voters participating, to your point. And we're going to get to a next question on that. There's always a big new issue discovered, in the election. It often bubbles up from reality. My podcast partner, Axelrod, likes to say people debate about democracy over the kitchen table when they can afford food. And so what do you think? Is it affordability? Is something else coming? What do you think will be the new thing that at least the Beltway obsesses about, but has some genuine organic roots, is millions and millions and millions of people vote in the process and start tuning in the second half of 2027?
So first to affordability, I think, the Democrats have done a good job of level setting the most basic thing that they need to sort of put in front of working class people to try and start regaining their trust. But to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think you can run a presidential campaign on the price of eggs or rent or those other things. It has to be more aspirational than that, right? The most effective modern presidents and presidential candidates are able to articulate a vision of the future that encompasses more than just, how much you're bringing in every month and whether or not it's enough to cover your basic needs. People need to be hopeful for not only themselves, but their kids. And that's what we've fundamentally lost, right? And there's a piece of this that's related to Trump's message to the working class, which was, we're going to make America great again by punishing the people who have betrayed you with trade deals, with open borders, with all of the rhetoric that appealed to those folks. And it only worked because they felt that the institutions, of government weren't delivering and fundamentally weren't seeing them, didn't recognize what they were struggling with. So I think we need somebody, and frankly, an entire reimagining of the party that centers the needs of the working class, again, but delivers a hope beyond just their basic needs. Now, what shape that takes, I think one of the things that maybe, I don't want to say it's a sleeper issue, but the thing that's really going to transform the landscape in the next 2 or 3 years, either the 4-day market slide that we're having right now, where people are starting to recognize that maybe we're over our skis on AI build out and all of that infrastructure, is really starting to unwind. And that could actually tip us into a recession, and that will swamp everything, right? That will reshape everything. Or the size and scale of this investment is actually justified, which means mass amounts of white-collar, knowledge-based workers, lots of kids that are coming out of USC who are expecting high-paying jobs to pay off the student loan debt that they have. They're no longer available at the same level because they're competing with technology that never gets sick, that never needs to go on vacation, that isn't worried about paying its mortgage, that isn't worried about health care. And no one in either party, right? We're talking about the price of eggs, the price of eggs, the price of eggs. We're sleepwalking through the biggest industrial and technological revolution probably of the last 50 years. And I haven't heard anyone on the national stage come up with a comprehensive plan to tell all of the kids that we keep telling generation after generation, go to college, go to college, go to college. Oh, and here's one, be a coder. Be a coder, and it's a guaranteed 6-figure salary, and don't worry about that debt that you piled up. Well, guess what? Guess what they're not hiring anymore? Coders. And no one is talking about that. And what's interesting is it's going to invert right when Democrats are trying to regain strength with the working class, the people who still vote for them in the managerial class, now they're going to get hit really hard. And so the question is, how do you pair broad-based economic and skills development for working class folks while also dealing with the anxiety of coders, accountants, lawyers, and everyone else who are going to be profoundly impacted by artificial intelligence? I don't know if it's going to come to pass, but if it does, we are not prepared for it. This society is not remotely prepared for what this actually means. If you look at the scale of investment, it should be a blaring, flashing red light for policymakers about getting in front of the next technological change and economic disruption.
There's an interesting little tip of the iceberg on this. The Teamsters in Massachusetts are looking at a ballot measure to ban self-driving trucks. If that thing gets on the ballot, it'll be about a lot more than trucks. And it'll be an interesting litmus test. I totally agree with that. Anybody else want to chime in on economic?
I guess I mean, to build on that, I think the thing I would say is, I would totally agree that the 2026 election should be, at least in my view, on cost of living, political reform, issues like that. But I think we come to a similar place, or I've come to a similar place with the Attorney General on, I think we have to ask ourselves some fundamental questions as to why we have Trump in this period. I mean, let's just think about America. This is a country that manifested one of the greatest leaders in human history, not American history, to deal with the Civil War. And it's a country that manifested one of the greatest leaders in human history, not American history, just American history, to deal with both the Depression and World War II. And now we've been living through, in my estimation, just personal to me, but like a truly terrible president, okay? But I do think we have to ask ourselves, like, why has that happened? And I think actually saw a few of our governor's candidates talking about this a little bit, which is, I think the sense, and when I kind of agree with Tad Devine on this, is there's a deep sense in the country that, and it's like pervasive. What thing that one value that is different in the last 8 years that is different from previous eras is a sense that people believe their children will be worse off than them. So in the height of stagflation in America, in the 1970s, 75% of Americans thought their kids would be better off than them, that the American dream was alive, that the future will be better than the past. In 2010, height of the Great Recession, 55 to 60% of Americans thought their kids would be better off than them. In 2017, and each year of the last 8 years, it has been 75% or 80% of Americans think their kids will be worse off than them. And I think our political system has not genuinely addressed that issue. I do think you get to it with people feel like the system is rigged because there is less economic mobility. So those facts are how people feel. But then let's look at the evidence. Economic mobility has declined in the US. It is half of what it is in Canada. The people, 7% of the people in the bottom 20% move up to the top 20%. Okay, this is a country where it used to be like 50% in the bottom 20% move up into the top 20%. Like we have had in the 50s and 60s, we'd had massive economic mobility in the country, and that has really stagnated. I think sometimes the left focuses on inequality instead of opportunity and mobility, but it does get to the same kind of concept, which is that people feel really stuck. So I think our leaders actually have to compete on a vision of how we reform our institutions to put ideas of this is a country that you can go as far as your talents can take you at the core of the mission of what our government is. And the truth is, our federal institutions, our federal government, is basically these agencies, the way we do business, are a product of the 1930s or the 1960s. And I hope we have leaders in the Democratic primary in the future who are thinking at a big scale of how we actually reform a series of institutions, higher ed, education, the social safety net, to actually put the opportunity for working class people to move up in the system, because I think that is driving a lot of our polarization. I mean, we will never out-hate Trump. I have a lot of hate myself personally. I rage at the TV. I will never out-hate him. It is not a coincidence that some of our great political leaders have put hope at the center of what they do. Hope and change, hope and change, man from hope. President Biden talked about hope a lot. So I feel what we have to, and we're working hard at this on CAP and having ideas of this size and scale, but I do think the opportunity to have a realigning election where we actually pull back working class people to the country is to have an economic vision that actually puts true opportunity at the base.
But let me push back a little.
Sure.
Because I agree with the rhetoric, but the Republican offer is you're not optimistic about the future because of foreigners and the deep state. It's a grievance message.
Yes.
What is the Democrat message other than articulating the problem and saying we ought to be hopeful? I think it's a fork in the road. I think it would be a Democratic grievance message. It's the corporations.
this
It's
is
wealth, or what's the other alternative?
my-
And where will the primary voters go?
1,000. What I'm saying is there is a third way option here. Okay, my view, and there are a lot of people who know politics better than me in this room. Most people, but I do not think that you can rail against. I think there's a lot of deep concern about the power of corporations in America, and that is legitimate, actually. I think that we have a level of oligarchy which is crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Elon Musk, the biggest donor to the Republican Party and to Donald Trump, is dictating what the federal government does and who gets fired is cuckoo. That is a crazy upside down world in a democracy. It is wrong. My point is, I do not think we can win 50-50 elections having our grievance against their grievance. But if we want to break out of this cycle of madness, we should be aiming for a realigning election, 55%, where we are pulling working class people back. And I think we have to put bigger ideas on the table of how we would actually, it's hope and a plan. How would we transform higher ed so that actually higher education is a vehicle for upward mobility in the country, as it was for decades, instead of to be candid, in many universities, it replicates elitism. When in America, the top 1%, families from the top 1% for the private elites have a 77 times more likelihood of being in those universities than the bottom 40%, the economic mobility engine of this country is dying. And so I think it's not right or left to me to say, let's make this a country actually a place where, regardless of your talents, you can succeed. That is that's what MAGA actually is about. It is going back to that period where people think that. So I think we have a lot of hard ideas. How do but I think the beauty is a strong word. The opportunity of Trump is that he's discovered a whole series of powers, right? That a president, I never knew we had these powers to just realign agencies. Yeah. Our Department of Justice never said we could just close agencies we don't like. But if you can close agencies, you can also transform agencies. And I think that we have to do a lot of hard work now to have ideas of a size and scale to have a realigning election.
Can I just add one?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I think for us to get to a hopeful message that resonates, I think the Democratic Party does have to really look at who they prioritize as stakeholders. I think it's really hard to really tell working class Americans, we're going to bring you back into the fold when a lot of the party or the leadership is tightly tied to corporations who are funding their campaigns and influencing a lot of decisions. One of the reasons I wanted to leave Capitol Hill is because the more senior I got, I started to see that the money that flows through politics actually does impact the way that people vote. I think a big part of making that change is we have to shed some of the leadership that we have right now, because as long as working class people are not actually the constituents that they are most beholden to, we're still going to see these outcomes. And I think that plays out in governance. We can have a lot of hopeful messages, and I know Republicans are there, so Democrats can't just bulldoze whatever legislation they want. But I think another opportunity we've seen from Donald Trump is that he fights. He does what he wants to do, and he deals with the consequences later. And seeing someone do that, your opposition, me as a Democratic voter, I'm like, okay, well, push as hard as you can to get what you need. But again, if your allegiances are to corporations, it's going to be really hard to do. So I think we need to see some changes within the party.
I want to go to General Torrez for a minute, but first, one word yes, no answer. Was it the right move for the Senate Democrats to end the shutdown?
Not as early as they did.
Agreed.
No.
Yeah, not
Okay.
as done it.
General Torrez, and you answer that one if you want, then I've got a big question for you. Okay. One of the things Republicans crow about the most, but I think it's a rearview mirror thing, is there's been growing through the Trump elections, double-digit growth in Latino support for the Republicans. The special elections are always a limited sample, but apparently a reversal. You're from New Mexico. Yeah. You understand the politics of all that really well. What's your take, and what do Democrats have to do?
Look, I think this is one of the places where the messaging and the strategy that was developed over the last several cycles was just out of sync, at least with working class Latinos in my community. One of the most sort of profound moments in sort of realizing that and I can't remember, I think it was 2020, it may have been 16, where they asked, it seemed like 30 presidential candidates on stage, whether or not we should decriminalize border crossings.
Right.
And literally everyone on the stage put their hand up. And all I could think is,
One person did not.
Right, one-
he became
one-
the president. Joe Biden didn't, and he became the president.
but virtually everyone else on that stage was doing that. And immigration has always sort of tied Democrats and knots. First and foremost, because they assume that that is the most important issue for Latino voters. And while it matters to Latino voters, it is, we are like all other Americans. We care about the quality of schools, the quality of jobs. And to Neera's point earlier, when we start reimagining like a new policy vision, if you understand Latinos at all, you should be careful about how you talk about corporations and businesses. Because do you know what the dream of virtually everybody coming over the border, whether they came in legally or illegally, is? To be an owner of a business, right? And so one of the elements of the Democratic messaging over the last 30 or 40, 50 years is that we have not done a good job in separating, when we talk about corporate power, we're talking about Elon Musk, right? But there is a slice of aspirational, especially among Latino men. They look at that wealth, and they see it as a sign of social status, and you've made it, and you've achieved these things. So they don't read it the same way. And so you want to be able to separate out the corrupting influence of big corporate power and big money donors on the political system without saying we're anti-business, right? And so an easy or a relatively straightforward thing you could do on the policy front is figure out the most effective way to help people, not just in the Hispanic and Latino community, start businesses, but Asian Americans are very entrepreneurial as well, right? Like, why aren't we starting to lean into how the government can help? Because the government's often viewed as a hindrance to the formation of those businesses. That is a huge shift that we need to sort of undertake and understand. The other piece is think about immigration crackdowns that have been happening all over the country, the brutality that we've seen, the mass federal agents jumping out of vehicles with weapons that are terrorizing communities. So far, the Democratic response has been centered on highlighting the impact to the immigrant community, which they should, right? It's disgraceful what is going on. But there's another important message that hasn't really been talked about, and that's the impact on Hispanic Americans, right? Citizens in this country, who Justice Kavanaugh has now said the immigration authorities are now free to use race and ethnicity in their enforcement protocols, which means people that have a name like mine and look like me run the risk of being tackled on the streets and treated as second-class citizens. But we are not highlighting that aspect enough. And why does it matter? Because there were a lot of men in the Hispanic community who shifted to voting for Donald Trump because when they heard his rhetoric on immigration, he thought he meant them over there. He wasn't talking about me over here. And the Democrats are not doing a good enough job at explaining how it impacts not just the immigrant community, but Hispanic citizens. Right? And when you start making that connection, that you are now viewed as a second-class citizen by the president, by his authorities, by this militarized approach to immigration enforcement, you will start to reclaim some sense of their belonging here. But then now they're listening to you because of the brutality they've seen from the Trump administration. You still have to offer them something other than not Trump. Right? You still have to fill in the gap. And the gap that you need to fill it in with is, we're going to help you build a business. We're going to help you climb the ladder of economic mobility. You're going to live in a safe community, right? You're going to go to a good school, and you're going to have access to healthcare. Those elements, those are core elements of the Democratic Party. and the message that we give to everybody. But there's been this mistake of like, if we just communicate on immigration, that's enough. And it's not enough.
I couldn't, go ahead.
Kamala Harris talked about investing in small businesses, though, and I think if you look at what Democrats do when governing, I mean, it's Donald Trump who went after the SBA's programs to help minority business owners. So sometimes I think we get this unfair, I think Democrats want to help people. Could we talk about it better? Do we need better communicators? Absolutely. But particularly around the 2024 election, could more have been, I'm sorry, audio folks, I'm messing this up. Could more have been said? Sure. And even going back to some of the culture war questions you asked, we don't control what the media chooses to focus on. Donald Trump has a huge platform. Now he's in the White House and has an even huger one. Republicans control all parts of Congress. And so we can't run away from these things. But I think because they control the conversation, sometimes we don't get credit for the things that we've actually done. And I don't have the solution to that. But I guess I just want to say that Kamala Harris did talk a lot about investing in small businesses. And when she was talking about, price gouging, I don't think she was pointing the finger at small businesses and people who are entrepreneurial. She was talking about these large corporations who are kind of working together to squeeze every dollar or penny out of Americans.
Yes. One of the old, just one sec, Neera. One of the old Republican rules in our world was always let the Democrats talk about programs. We talk about values, and values will beat programs every time. Go ahead, Neera, quickly, because I want to ask a question.
I do think there is a conflict here between that we should just acknowledge, which is I think oligarchy is a completely different thing, but how we talk about the economy, and it's not just Kamala, it's like how the Democratic Party talks about the economy and whether we sound, and I just want to be anti-rich when some communities would like to be rich. I think that's like a thing we have to really struggle with, because I will say, Asian community, we had a huge drop-off in 2024. Like these, with Latinos, gigantic drop-off. And I think a lot of that was a rhetoric that sounded, to the Attorney General's point, like we were anti, people becoming rich. And, I don't think that was because of Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. They definitely wanted people to be rich. But I think those voices do get amplified.
So, Tad, I'm going to finish with you, and then we'll go to questions. And this is real political geek stuff, so hopefully you will enjoy it. The calendar. I'm a big fan of the old Napoleon thing. They asked him once who Napoleon's greatest generals were, and he had a couple of these marshals who were his top generals, who were all geniuses. They all hated each other, just like most top generals. So Napoleon got out of it by saying, well, they're all great, a little tall for my taste, but great. But over in the corner, that sergeant with the glasses is the most valuable soldier in my entire army. That's my cartographer, my map guy. Because if I understand the terrain better than the other general, and I maneuver right, a smaller army can beat a bigger one every time. And Napoleon did that a lot. So the cartography of the primary process, as you're an expert in, is going to be important. That sometimes can affect, of the 117 people running, who might have certain advantages. What do you think? You talked earlier about New Hampshire maybe moving up. I think there's a chance one of the big, more racially balanced states with a big city, a Michigan or a Georgia might move up. I know there's legislative interest. But you've been part of this process. Put on your Kruskin glasses and kind of predict what you think and who that might benefit.
Well, first I'll say this, that having done, I think, 7 presidential campaigns in this country, and a lot more outside of this country, in terms of strategy, to me, the most important component of the strategic process of figuring out how to help somebody win a nomination is the calendar. Yeah. The calendar is, understanding it. What are the opportunities? What are the pitfalls? What is the sequence of these states? How does it work out? I believe a calendar which has some early states separate from the other states. We call it the window. They have the pre-window where some states occur, and then we have a window period where all the states can go. That's a good way to start the process. Having lived through a couple of these, in not so recent past, I used to like it when there was Iowa and New Hampshire, and then we moved Nevada in. Really, Harry Reid moved Nevada, and then South Carolina came in, and it was a nice sequence. I don't think that works anymore. Iowa, unfortunately, and I lived through this in 2016, and I think others saw it even more in 2020, has lost its place at the front of the line because of the way that the caucuses were mismanaged. It simply did not live up to it. New Hampshire, in my mind, is a great place to begin a nominating process. There's a more than 100-year history of that. The participation in that process is huge. A lot of people go out, and most importantly, in my view, allowing independents to decide whether or not to participate in either the Democrat or the Republican primary, both on the same day. So they've got to make that choice. You can't go vote in one and then go vote in another. That's the way to really begin the nominating process. And to those who say, well, listen, New Hampshire, it's so homogenous. There's no diversity of things there. I think one of the biggest reasons Barack Obama was a nominee in 2008 was that he went into Iowa and he won it. Okay, and by the way, if you want proof of that, take a look at what happened at the polls in South Carolina 1 or 2 days after the Iowa caucuses. Yeah. Okay, it just changed dramatically. So I think we should construct a nominating process where there is, where the communities which are so central and important to the coalition Democrats want to build, the African American community, the Latino community, a diverse electorate, where they are recognized at the front end of the process. But if you want to win, the white vote is still, I thought it was going to be coming into the low 60s by now. It's hovering over 70, okay, in these elections. If you want to win that election, you better talk to those 7 out of 10 people who are going to vote, and you better be able to win them.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to questions now. We have microphones here and there. Somebody should ask, is Kamala Harris going to run for president? Should she? Because I didn't get to it, but it could be a fun one. All right. Yes, we'll start with you, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Rob Lucero, Trojan, fight on, and native Angelino, 5th generation. I'm going to be running for office, or I'm running for office now for Congress here in Los Angeles, in the heart of LA. And the question I have is really about what the last midterm elections tell you, including the Mamdani election, as someone who's worked within the Democratic Party for most of my life since after Ross Perot, so starting in 1993. And I was basically one of the troublemakers in the Democratic Party saying, we're just not bold enough. I found myself being a New Deal Democrat, for example, in 2018 when Nancy Pelosi was saying, we're going to have a better deal because we don't want to say the New Deal. So what do you think we can do now to actually have just more reckless abandon to talk to Americans about how do you actually address affordability? How do you address the younger people who feel like they're not going to do as well as their parents did and all that? This is really what I'm going to be talking about in my campaign, but I want to hear what you all have to say. Thank you.
Who wants this one?
I'll say a few words.
I'm asking for free advice from a bunch of top-tier consultants here.
And
Sorry.
We're going to keep it brisk because we want a lot of questions. Thank you.
I'll be very brief, which is to say, look, I think people should run races which are responsive to their constituents, right? And what wins in Los Angeles? I mean, I think we need to aim to be a very big tent, which is we need the center and the left. That is how other countries have actually gotten out of the authoritarian threat, is to actually create a broad coalition between the center and the left in those countries. That's how Poland got out of their basic authoritarian threat. So I embrace like Mamdani running in New York or people running on bold progressive agendas in LA or San Francisco or anywhere else. I would also say, though, the left has to give space to the moderates who need to win in places. I mean, the future of the Democratic Party is we have to win in states like Ohio and Iowa post-2030, not just for 2026, but post-2030 to actually ever win the Senate again. So we have to run races in places like that. And a strong party can allow, as Governor Newsom said, a Mamdani and a Manchin. And that is like what this party has to actually do to win in states across the country.
Sir.
Hi. Beyond the issue of affordability, the issue of AI was raised on the panel. Historically, people change careers 3 to 5 times over a lifetime. So it seems like there's going to be a tsunami of people out of work because of AI. What about Democratic candidates coming up with a plan for incentivizing corporations and businesses all of them to retrain all these workers that are going to be thrown out of work because of AI. I don't know how you, on a national level, how you incentivize businesses to want to retrain all these people.
Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona has that precise idea. It's a very good idea.
Anybody else on this AI?
Yeah, I would just say
It's hard to retrain. AI is so damn good at what it does that you have to, it's a productivity machine, which means you less people. And the economics of that are invincible. So it's a tricky thing to do.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I would just say, when I teach, and I've taught a lot for a number of years, I always tell my students that the biggest lesson I've learned now, having worked on campaigns for 45 years, since I worked for Jimmy Carter, believe it or not, is that every winning campaign is about the future. And the hard part is figuring out how to get into that space, where the voters are there and how you can join them. And I think for Democrats to talk about issues like this and to propose concrete plans and proposals to deal with the future that is really scaring a lot of people is the fastest way to get them on your side. And when you talk about the fights that lie ahead, convincing them that in those fights you will be on their side. When you make that combination, that's when you connect with voters and that's when you win elections.
Yeah, it's such a vexing. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say it would help if we had more younger people in leadership positions. I mean, you look what happened with social media and why we have not been able to regulate it, because the right people were not in office to get ahead of that. And so I think that is going to be something that's really important. I don't mean to disparage older people, but I really am not trying to. But, as technology advances, if you have a flip phone, like how are you going to jump in on technological change like AI?
Yeah, it's so hard. I do a lot being an old Detroit kid in electric vehicles. Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford Motor Company, said about 6 months ago at Aspen, if Ford can't compete worldwide in EVs, there's no future for the Ford Motor Company in the next 10 years. Ford is the #1 industrial employer in the U.S., bigger than GM in U.S. employment. But when we sit down with UAW, they say, no, wait a minute, these EV cars are more snapped together, so we only need 1,100 guys in the plant with higher skills than the 3,000 we have now. Well, we're not going to do that. Well, then there's going to be a Chinese plant with 900 people building the cars. There's no essay question answer to this. It's binary. And it's a real problem because what do you do with those people? Anyway, we're not going to figure that out here. I see we have another question.
Yes. Hello, my name's Jerry. I'm actually a UCLA student, so I apologize. But I'm here today.
UCLA?
Yes.
Did you say?
Yes. Oh.
92 Bruin.
Oh
Yeah,
my
so I'm a
God.
UCLA student. I'm here today, and I am a reluctant Democrat, obviously, because I'm not very happy with the state of the party. Growing up, I was told that the Democrat Party was a party of labor of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and obviously since Bill Clinton, it has deviated from that. And I grew up in a very economically precarious household, and I'm a Democrat because of economic security. And obviously, we're seeing a new realignment happening. And Donald Trump had a statue of Andrew Jackson, who's like the modern founder of the Democratic Party. And J.D. Vance's family and his background was originally Democratic. How do you see the new political realignment happening? And my other question is, do you think the Democratic Party is overly self-righteous, that they came up being correct, more white, and more driven by their ideology than working with people that they need to win over who may not necessarily agree with them on social issues?
Go ahead.
I don't feel like there's necessarily a realignment happening. I mean, if we look at what happened a couple weeks ago on Election Day, that's really different. And I know it's a different landscape because it's an odd year election, but that's really different from what happened in 2024, 2020. Democrats won. I think there's a lot of soft support in the middle, and they are just looking for leaders who are going to give them the things that they need. I think what you speak to, like, I grew up on government assistance. Like, one of my earliest memories is going to a WIC office to get groceries. And that is part of why I'm a Democrat. I've benefited from Pell Grants, free and reduced lunch, and I do think that those that support gave me a step up to be where I am now. And I think that's what a lot of people need right now. Like, inequality is continuing to grow, but they don't see either party actually addressing it. I think Donald Trump is a great PR guy. He knows how to talk about things and get people excited about it, but we have not seen that actually bear out in governance. And I know governance is boring, But I really think that is where you make the change. You know, we have had a big conversation on our side about how we need better communicators, and we absolutely do. But that communication has to be paired with action that comes after so that we can maintain the trust of people. And that lack of trust is why I don't necessarily think there's a realignment, because people are willing to go wherever they can get what they need.
Can I just answer your last question very quickly? I will say fundamentally, I do think there is a way in which Republicans weaponize judgmentalism by Democrats or the left or whatever online and elsewhere. And I do think it is important for us to have a welcoming. I give credit to Mamdani on this, actually. You know, he was running from the left, but actually talked all the time about how he wanted to have Trump voters and a big tent and welcome people. And so I think that's really important. And to your first point, the big difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2 is his policies right now. The people who are bearing the burden of his policies are working class people. They disproportionately bear the burden of tariffs, and they are going to lose health care, and their health care is rising because of the policies of this administration, which is very different from the first term, where he really didn't have a bunch of policies. So I think that means we have to center that in our, focus on that in our conversations. But I think I can make a very easy case at any given moment that if you are a struggling person in America, the last person, Mr. Golden Ballroom himself, is to rely on is Donald Trump.
Just quickly, there has been a realignment inside the Republican Party. We've gone to this kind of authoritarian populism. The portraits of Reagan are coming down as I weep, and the portraits of Juan Perón are going up. And the question will there be a reformation in the next cycle after the political failures of Trump? Alex Michelson here from CNN.
Mike,
Hi.
Smart question I heard. Do you think Kamala Harris is going to run? And should she?
Okay. Is she going to run, do we think, and should she? We'll start with Raúl.
With an elected official, you want him to answer?
He's able to say, I'm studying the matter. There's nothing wrong with that.
You know, I just don't. I don't know.
Right.
It seems like she took a pass on running for governor of California because she was still strongly considering that. I'm not sure that, you know, the what happened in the last campaign sets her up well for what's undoubtedly going to be a very intense primary with lots and lots of comers. So it's far from a foregone conclusion that she'd be the nominee again, but she certainly seems like she's still got her hat in the ring.
I don't know if she wants to run, but I would agree that it seems like she's still interested in it. Do I think she should? No.
Okay. That's an answer. Go ahead.
Elections are about the future.
There we go. There's a lot of Californians running. I mean, you know, Newsom's the front runner, right? I saw Roe this morning was great. Okay, that was a fantastic press conference that they pulled out. He's, you know, if Kamala runs, but I predict those three are not going to win. Instead, the senator who gets put in jail will win from his jail cell. Okay, that's what's going to happen. All right.
That'll be new for me. You're our last question, my good friend.
Hey guys, good to see you. Your local campaign strategist here in LA and political analyst on Spanish language. But you know, the one thing I haven't heard is in campaigns, money is the milk that pays for success. And in Democrats, my experience my whole life has been that union money plays a big role in it. And I'd like to know your stance on how has that morphed now. I remember watching the Teamsters president at the RNC convention, and that was like a big deal. And now as we move into this separation of classes for the future campaigns, how do you see the union power, i.e. money, actually being effective in messaging that Democrats are going to have to need to talk to the moderates or independents?
Great question. I'll say here in California, the public employee union is the most powerful political force in the state, easily, too. In my view, it's a huge problem. Anybody else? Okay. Somebody from the teachers' unions back there was taking notes, I think. Yeah.
I think one thing I can offer, which doesn't exactly answer the question, is that grassroots fundraising is also a big component that I think has, I mean, you know, unions do have a lot of money, but I think if you are a really dynamic candidate, someone like AOC, someone like Mamdani, you can start to pull money from other places and not necessarily need that institutional funding.
I mean, I guess I'd say, I think that a thing that we all should struggle with on the union question, and we are definitely trying to work this out, is there's no, I don't know how we did on the fundraising, but there's no president in my lifetime who was more pro-union than Joe Biden. It wasn't even a close call. It was like the most pro-union president in everything. He was very focused on working class people, and it did not translate as much as I think it should have. So I think we should all just struggle with why that was, and are there countervailing culture issues, whatever. But I think it's really it was a big. I think he saw the dignity of work as central to his presidency, and that's why he was pro-union. And it did not translate into massive shifts, even through the course of the 4 years. So that is something we should think through.
Maybe we need new union leadership too.
There's a schism, though. You put the California carpenters in a room with the teachers union, there's not a lot of agreement, other than the principle of union membership is good for working people.
Well,
and that's a big dynamic.
Let me say one thing on the unions, because somebody has to run every couple of years and go and meet with union leaders, which I've done a lot, and I get prepped to talk about labor, wage theft or organizing or lots of other things that my team says, okay, these are the issues that they want to talk about. You know what we end up talking about? Why do you keep trying to take our guns away?
Yeah, that's a big issue.
Every time I go into a union hall,
Yeah.
that's the first question.
Culture.
Yeah.
Particularly a private sector union.
Yeah.
Right. And so just it's a really important point, because we have this institutional frame of thinking about how we're going to communicate with unions and what they really care about. And I have that conversation with their leadership. Okay. When I meet with leaders, we talk about wage theft, we talk about organizing, we talk about collective bargaining. When I meet with members, they ask me a question related to guns, and then recently
Immigration and crime.
Immigration, crime. I mean, we don't even get to so-called union-related economic questions.
Right.
So that's a very big part of what's going on underneath the surface at the institutional level.
Yeah, in Michigan politics, we used to joke the most heavily armed installations in the state were any auto plant. Good luck to the Canadians if they invade. They're going to have to get through a belt of them with 50,000 guns.
I just say quickly, working class people have a lot of different concerns, and a lot of people in the Democratic Party want to say they're fighting for working class people, but you have to meet them where they are on a whole series of issues, economic and non-economic issues.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, panel. Thank you for the great question.